Hey guys, tonight we begin with something that, on the surface, sounds like a food channel topic. But don't worry, I promise no one's going to leap out of the oven, Gordon Ramsay style, screaming about undercooked scallops. Instead, we're gliding into the kitchens of medieval Europe, dimly lit, smoky, and full of smells that were probably questionable. This isn't a crisp Food Network documentary. It's more like a long, drawn-out dinner party where everyone is vaguely ill and half the dishes are covered in mystery sauces. So, settle in, pull up a blanket, maybe sip some tea. Something far more hygienic than medieval Ireland. We'll talk about kings, queens, and what exactly was going on at their dinner tables. And, just as important, what their servants were stuck with. Spoiler, it was usually not the same thing. Let's start with the obvious. Medieval kings didn't exactly have a nutritionist counting their calories. No one was recommending a balanced plate or 5 servings of vegetables a day. Instead, food was about wealth, status, and showing off. If you were royalty, the goal wasn't to eat what was good for you. The goal was to eat what other people couldn't. Bread. Everyone ate bread. But if you were royal, your bread had to be the whitest of white, so finely sifted, it was basically flour's version of an Instagram filter. Peasants might chew on dark, gritty loaves that crunched suspiciously, sometimes with stones still hiding in the flour. Kings, on the other hand, demanded bread that looked like it had been washed 3 times in bleach. And then, of course, there was meat, mountains of it. If you believe the records, especially from households like Henry VIII, it feels like half the royal diet was just different animals roasted in slightly different ways. Beef, mutton, venison, swan, peacock, boar. And because subtlety was not a medieval virtue, sometimes they redressed the roasted animals in their original feathers or skins before serving, which was less appetizing than it sounds. Imagine being served a roast peacock, only someone has painstakingly glued the feathers back on, like a taxidermy project that's about to slide off the plate. But the real kicker is that kings didn't eat like this because it tasted better. They ate like this because it proved they could. If you had access to swan or a whole roasted ox, you weren't just full, you were politically full. Every bite said, "Look at me, I can command this level of waste." Meanwhile, the servants, they were not gnawing on peacock wings. The general rule was, the higher you were on the social ladder, the whiter, fattier, and rarer your food became. Servants in the great halls usually got what we'd call the leftovers. Lower cuts of meat, tough bread, watery pottage. Pottage, by the way, is the medieval catchal stew. Basically, take whatever you have, turnips, onions, oats, maybe. A suspicious bit of meat, if you're lucky. Boil it until it's gray and serve. Every day, twice a day, possibly until you die. It was filling. It was cheap. It was about as exciting as lukewarm oatmeal that had decided to give up on life. The servants' diet wasn't designed to be enjoyable. It was designed to keep them upright and working. They needed calories, not culinary adventures. Think of it as medieval workplace cafeteria food. If the cafeteria only had one item on the menu and it always tasted faintly of turnip. Now, there's a funny irony here. While kings were stuffing themselves with roast animals and thick sauces, the servants seating their bland grains and vegetables were probably a bit healthier, because medieval royal cuisine had a little problem. Digestion. Royal kitchens loved spices, They were expensive, imported from far away, and therefore the perfect flex. Medieval doctors, who were still clinging to ancient ideas about humors, also thought spices kept your body balanced. So, if you had a roast chicken, the royal chef might bury it under a mountain of cinnamon, cloves, nutmeg, ginger, and pepper. Sounds like a holiday recipe gone wrong, but in the medieval mindset, it was luxury on a plate. The result was food so heavily spiced and sauced that you probably couldn't tell what you were eating anymore, which was useful, actually, because not all royal meat was as fresh as you'd hope. Refrigeration didn't exist, and salting only got you so far. So, if the venison was a little advanced, the solution was not to throw it out. The solution was to douse it in enough clove powder to stun an elephant. So yes, kings got the fancy stuff, but it often came with heartburn, gout, or the occasional case of food poisoning. Servants chewing their turnip stew were bland but alive. Let's wander over to an example. Henry VIII, because, of course, him again at his court. Records show his kitchens went through something like 1,240 oxen, 8,200 sheep, 2,300 deer, and 400,000 gallons of ale in a single year, which is not a balanced diet. That's more like a cholesterol experiment. Henry himself was famous for overindulging. By the end of his life, he was so obese that he had to be winched onto his horse with a mechanical device. His health problems, diabetes, ulcers, infections, were not exactly helped by eating goose liver and spiced beef every day. Meanwhile, the kitchen staff, who cooked all of this, weren't exactly digging into swan pies. They got what was left after the lords, ladies, and household officers had taken their share. That might mean a bit of cold mutton or some bread soaked in broth. They had to eat fast, too. Servants weren't exactly dining leisurely. Meals were rushed, practical affairs, taken standing up or in cramped quarters. So, while the king was parading a gilded boar's head into the great hall, the people who had actually roasted the boar were just hoping for a scrap of fat to gnaw on another. Example, Richard II of England. His household had one of the most detailed cookbooks we still have from the medieval period, called the Femme of Curie. It's full of recipes that read like dares. There are instructions for almond milk jellies, peacock pies, and porpoise stew, because, apparently, someone thought fish-like mammals should also be on the menu. Richard's meals were theatrical events. Courses weren't just food, they were pageants. Animals would arrive on the table, decorated in gold leaf, or pies would be filled with live birds that flew out when cut open. Basically, dinner as performance art. Imagine trying to get comfortable and digest after that. The servants at Richard's court, still mostly pottage, bread, and ale. Unless, of course, they were lucky enough to be near the scraps after a feast, in which case they might get a small piece of something exotic. Not because anyone cared if they enjoyed it, but because wasting food, at least in edible form, was bad optics. Speaking of optics, let's talk about medieval health theories for a second. Doctors of the time genuinely believed food shaped your personality. If you ate too much beef, you'd become sluggish. Too many vegetables, you'd be weak. Too much pork, you'd be lustful. Which makes you wonder what people thought when they saw Henry VIII inhaling pork pies. Servants, who were stuck with grains and root vegetables, were supposedly humble and grounded. Royals, who drowned in meat and spices, were considered more prone to fiery tempers, and, well, the history of royal meltdowns kind of proves the theory. So, to sum up this gentle stroll so far, medieval kings ate food that was heavy, spiced, symbolic, and often not that good for them. Servants ate food that was plain, filling, repetitive, and occasionally soul-crushing. Both groups, in their own ways, suffered. One from excess, the other from monotony. And yet, if you could time travel and had to choose, honestly, you might do better with the servant's diet. Less chance of gout, fewer bad swans, and no obligation to smile politely when someone serves you porpoise in almond milk. Let's float now to the French court, because the French have always been dramatic about food. At the court of Charles VI, nicknamed Charles the Mad for fairly obvious reasons, the meals were even more extravagant than in England. He was served dozens of dishes per course, many dripping in gold leaf. Banquets went on for hours, with whole tables of sugar, sculptures, elaborate pastries, and candied fruits. The irony, of course, is that Charles spent large parts of his reign too unwell to enjoy much of it. His servants, again, kept to their barley bread and beer. They were not tasting sugar sculptures, but they did have to carry them in, carefully, and then watch nobles poke at them until they collapsed, which brings us back to the same contrast. Kings ate like spoiled children in a candy shop. Servants ate like practical adults with a very dull pantry. And I think that's a good spot to pause our slow drift, because we've set the scene. The great halls, the roasts and stews, the bleached bread for royals, the gritty bread for everyone else, the endless pottage cycle, and the strange health theories that made everyone think eating porpoise in almond milk was a sign of nobility. In the next stretch, we'll wander deeper into more specific kings, queens, and their strange dining habits. Spoiler, the Habsburgs get involved. And whenever they get involved, things get chewy. All right, so we've set the table. We know kings liked their bread white and their meat decorated like a Renaissance craft project. Servants were quietly spooning gray pottage in the corner. Sing Sing